Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Hey all, we've been getting some requests lately for us to re-upload new versions of some of our old stories from before the adpocalypse and the duplication apocalypse. Like for instance, I'm digging out the Easter hide behind story to put back out there this weekend by request. These next two videos are two of my favorite of the very first stories we told on this channel way back in 2016. The first one is an amalgam of several stories about vampires in New York City that I won't reveal the sources of. The second one was told to me by the relative of someone my father used to work with. I have no idea how true either of them are. Well, I know parts of the first story are definitely true, but that's not to say I know anything about the vampire lifestyle other than what I've observed from a distance. So, turn out the lights. Or, if you're watching this in the morning, I guess put on sunglasses or something and get ready to journey back in time to 2016 and be frightened by stories of vampires and the little troll people. Enjoy. And remember, we'll be back tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. with an all-new Dogman story. Now take it away, PQ Ribber and Madeline Starr.
Missing Time and Vampires is told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. This happened during a cold, rainy month back when I was a teenager, staying in New York City at my Aunt Ida's apartment while she was away in Europe. My family lived up in Saugerties, but I always loved coming down to the city, and that's why I live here now that I'm old and gray, I suppose. Even though I love it, though, the scariest thing that ever happened to me happened right here. Aunt Ida's place was a huge penthouse apartment on the upper reaches of Central Park West. Wrapping in an L shape around two sides of the building, it offered magnificent views west, showing nearly all of Central Park, and north of Harlem. There was also a private section of the roof occupying the same space that was amazing to have parties or barbecues on. I remember going to one party Aunt Ida had that Burt Lancaster and Peter Bogdanovich showed up to. Ask your great-grandpa Google who they were. As a kid, I felt like it was its own city on a mountaintop with a cavern system built underneath. The apartment itself was a maze, with the bright rooms overlooking Manhattan leading to dark rooms and hallways that felt more like tunnels with a dozen rooms on either side. I'd literally gotten lost 3 times there and always found a weird painting or art object as a reward for my wandering. Aunt Ida had the most amazing taste of any adult I had ever met. Her home felt like a museum, library, and repository of the coolest things that ever existed. She had moved in when the neighborhood was at its lowest in the earlier mid-70s. The previous tenant had been there 50 years but died leaving no relatives. My aunt got the place cheaper from the landlord because she agreed to clean out the dead man's stuff herself. She decided to keep it all instead, adding to the ancient and magic feel of it all. To get a new place like that now would probably cost millions even without any of the antique furnishings. In fact, that may have been true back when this story happened in the 1990s. Although, I don't think Aunt Ida ever made more than $50,000 in a year. She made more use of her cash than any person I am likely to ever meet. After a week or 10 days of enjoying the luxury in private, I began to crave some company and tried to plan a party. I spent a day making phone calls and emails, only to learn that none of my friends from upstate were available for various reasons. I didn't yet know anyone in Manhattan, so I figured if I wanted to have a party before the summer was over, I'd better go out and meet some new people. I picked up a copy of the Village Voice, and over the next 2 weeks I attended all the less expensive establishments that advertised in their pages. Nothing ever seemed to happen wherein I ended up meeting anybody, and I left each establishment the same way I went in, alone. So imagine my surprise when one night while eating by myself in a diner on Avenue A, when a group of 3 goth-looking people asked if they could share my table. I thought at first the place must be crowded for them to want to sit with me, but then I realized that the 4 of us were the only customers in the place. "Where you from?" one of them asked me. He was older looking than the others, who I thought looked roughly my age. This one, though, had white hair on the sides. He was wearing a cape and looked like a TV show horror host to me. I glanced around to see if I was on a hidden camera TV show when he asked again, "Where are you from?" "I'm from New York, same as you," I replied, and all three gasped and looked at each other. "He has the sight," said the female, who I notice now is kind of cute. I'm partial to girls who think I have superpowers, so I didn't bother to break it to her that I just recognized her sugar daddy's New York accent. "He has the power," said the young man. I wondered if he was dating the girl or if they were both dating the old guy. "Allow me to introduce myself," said the old man while introducing his hand. "I am Bartholomew." I know I smiled, but hid it quickly as I could. If Bartholomew wasn't a great name for a TV horror show host, I didn't know what was. Bartholomew continued, "My companions here are Nightshade and Thunderblossom." That was all I could take, and as I snorted through my nose, quickly covering it up as well as possible with a cough. "I'm sorry, I have a cold," I told them with a straight face, adding, "I probably shouldn't have shaken your hand." "Oh, don't worry," said the girl. I don't know if she was Night Blossom or Thunderclap, but either way, she continued. "Master Bartholomew is beyond mortal disease. His only malady is the ennui resultant from the eternal life of darkness inherent." I nodded, as though that made sense. "Can you guess how old the master is?" she asked me, and Bartholomew suggested I try and guess. He looked 65 maybe, so I guess he looked 50 to be nice. Bartholomew called me a flatterer and then insisted he was 382 years old and a vampire. "Don't be frightened. I only take victims who go willingly, and I grant each of them eternal life in death," the man sitting across the table from me said matter-of-factly. The boy asked me point blank if I would like to join them in eternal darkness. I said probably not, but did they know any places I could hang out to meet new people? They each sighed heavily. The girl's sigh was by far the cutest and most exasperated. Bartholomew said I could tag along with them to the next party they were hitting, but I should stay out of their hair once we got there. That seemed like a good deal to me, so I got myself a slice of pie to give them time to finish their Polish food. Yeah, I know, vampires who eat pierogies. Well, I didn't say they were actually vampires. I just said they told me they were vampires. We grabbed a cab and they told him some addresses that I couldn't make out. It seemed like we drove for a year. I was surprised when we got on a bridge. I finally got to Party in Manhattan, and it turns out we were driving to some bridge and tunnel place. I thought we were in Brooklyn, but after a while I realized we were in Queens. In the 1990s, can you imagine? Even then it seemed we drove another year before we turned onto this dark, windy pathway lit only by the cab's headlights. I started to realize I was going to have to go home from here on my own using public transportation, and I had a sinking feeling this night was only going to get worse, no matter what happened. Maybe I could get this cabbie to drive me straight to a train station and skip the party. I checked my pockets and I had a grand total of $2.18. I had my bank card, but cabs didn't take those in those days. My best bet was to hope I could make friends enough with someone to get a ride home from the party. I looked out the window at the house, also similar, all with exactly the same amount of tiny yard around them. Then we started going down blocks where the private homes were built much closer, touching each other with no front yards at all. A short while later, it was apartment buildings and dirtier streets. "This is it on the right," shouted the girl, and the cab lurched to a screeching halt. Bartholomew paid the man, and we walked up to the building's graffitied over intercom. I wondered if it still worked. The boy pushed a button. After a while, the speaker made a terrible noise, followed by a garbled voice asking, "Who is the eunuch inviting his own death?" "I am Night," intoned Bartholomew, "bringer of death and resurrection." The speaker crackled, and then the voice squawked, "Yay, we thought you'd never get here," followed immediately by the terrible noise of the door's buzzer being buzzed to let us in. We went inside, and the girl pressed the button for the elevator. Meanwhile, the front door buzzer kept buzzing and buzzing. Finally, it stopped. Then it beeped twice and went back to buzzing, loudly. The elevator ride was soothingly quiet, and it occurred to me that I probably would have been happier back on Central Park West reading a book about a party than actually being here going to a party. I decided that if I was still alive by the next day, to force myself to remember this lesson. I could hear the party approaching as the elevator moved from the 3rd to 4th floor, and when the doors opened, I thought the sound was going to kill me. I swear it was so loud that I could only feel it with my body. My ears were rendered irrelevant. I wandered through the party, which was so darkly lit that I walked into 3 different people wearing black before finding the bar. Once there, I saw the price list and realized I couldn't afford to buy anything. I got the attention of the bartender and asked him where I could find a bus or a train. He couldn't hear me over the music, and I realized nobody else would be able to either. Finding the door, I set out to walk until I figured out a way to find out where I was. I had forgotten how much longer it takes to walk down a dark forest road that you just drove up. Every single pebble hurt through my threadbare sneakers, and every single rock seemed placed perfectly to twist either one of my ankles or the other. I had no choice but to go slowly, shuffling my feet to feel my way along the dirt road. In the forest, I could hear a woman crying, which just sent shivers through me. What was she doing out there? Was it a trap? Could she see me even though it was too dark for me to see her? Suddenly, the entire scene lit up, and I do mean suddenly. It was dark, then it was brighter than daylight, and there was no sound or anything separating the one from the other. Off in the forest, deep in the trees, stood shining people wearing white robes. At least that's what I thought I saw. I squinted my eyes and tried to look again, but now I couldn't see them. That's when I woke up on the beach. It was sunny out. It had to be after 9 a.m. Somehow I had lost most of the night. I looked around and saw I was in a train station, sitting outside by a track, and according to a sign behind me, the station was called Plandome. This panicked me, as I'd never heard of Plandome before, and I began to wonder exactly where I'd ended up after the night before. When a train pulled into the station, I rose to get on and almost blacked out. Forcing myself to breathe calmly, I made it on the train and crashed into a seat sideways. The conductor was attracted by the noise and refused to take my bank card. He told me I had to get off the train, go down to the ticket booth, use the ATM to take out money, buy a ticket, then come back up to the train. I did exactly as he asked, dizzy the entire way, and as I ran back to the train, he started the engine and pulled away, smiling and waving at me. I gave him the honor of a one-finger salute and collapsed onto a bench, waiting the full hour until the next train arrived. When I finally got home, I marched directly to bed, but I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the apartment's many mirrors. I had dark rings under my eyes. Stopping short, I stared in shock at how terrible I looked. That's when I noticed, and I kid you not, 2 red marks on my neck. They look totally fake, like something from an Amicus vampire movie. Or maybe I should say Amicus horror movies sure had realistic bites in them, because when I touched the red marks, I could feel by how sensitive they were that they were not makeup or a trick. I needed to take stock of the situation. I didn't see any vampires in the forest. I saw a light. I only remembered seeing a light, then waking up in the train station. I was casting a reflection in the mirror, and I'd been out in the sun all day, so I clearly wasn't a vampire. Not yet, anyway. That was when I stopped myself. Now I sounded as ridiculous as that boy and girl hanging around the old man Bartholomew. They must have drugged me, they must have bitten me. That didn't make them vampires. It made them lunatics. I decided to go to the emergency room, but first I needed to take a nap. I staggered to a couch and collapsed into sleep. The nap led to the wildest dream I'd ever had. I saw myself in my bed when suddenly a bright light, brighter than the sun itself, appeared outside the window. I dreamed I saw my body rise off the bed and float out the window into the extreme brightness outside where Central Park used to be. I could see the people on the street, but nobody noticed me or the light. They just kept walking along doing their own boring things. As I entered the light, I felt the intense sensation of burning throughout my body. I floated back into the room, re-merged with my body, and I woke up, trying to scream but hearing nothing coming from my throat. Falling off the couch, I banged my elbow on the coffee table and shouted, "Ow!" Realizing I could now speak, I got myself up, expecting to feel dizzy, but feeling fine. I looked in the mirror to check on myself. The rings were still there under my eyes, but the red marks on my neck were gone. I was at first disappointed, as I had set it in my head to go to the emergency room, and now I had no reason to. I probably still could get a checkup, but I couldn't get Aunt Ida to pay for a checkup, only for an emergency room visit. I let it drop and tried to forget the entire thing happened. Got myself a membership in a local video store and spent the rest of my summer home alone, watching John Candy and Tom Hanks movies. And to this day, in spite of all my great love for the city of New York, I still refuse to set foot in the county of Queens.
The Nightmare Face, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. I want to tell you a story about the most horrible things I have ever had to live with. Now, when I was a kid, my family was poor and lived in the South Bronx. We had roaches, we had mice, we had rats, we had those giant water bug cockroaches. Ugh. We even had centipedes that would bite us in our beds at night. But it wasn't until I had some money to my name that I met the most terrible pests of all. After I grew, I got lucky and married a very kind and somewhat well-off man. And he bought us a house in a nice secluded neighborhood out on the edges of the suburbs, just large enough that we could raise a small family there, if the good Lord saw fit to bless us. I wouldn't call us rich, but I never had to work, so I kept the house clean and grew a modest-sized garden out back. This was the early 1960s, and one night my husband and I watched Rod Serling on the TV. My late husband. Let's call him Claude. He hated Rod Serling with a passion, but I loved that show, so he watched it with me. He said it gave me nightmares and I would wake up saying strange things to him, but I never remembered this, so I liked the show just fine. Anyway, that night there was a show about a talking doll that kills people. Or else it was a ventriloquist dummy that kills people. I'm not sure, but either way, it was about something small that shouldn't talk but does. So when my husband awoke to me standing by the window screaming, he naturally assumed this was another Rod Serling-induced nightmare. Except it wasn't. What happened is that I got up inexplicably at 3 a.m., and unable to get back to sleep, I decided to look out the windows at our backyard and the forest off in the distance. It was very peaceful watching the branches blow in the breeze, back and forth, back and forth. And soon I was beginning to feel sleepy again. I could swear I heard someone close by whispering my name. Then the hideous thing popped its head up to stare at me from the bottom of the window, and I screamed. It looked like the face of a little man or a doll. Not a human, more a mockery of a human face. It looked wrong somehow. It wasn't because it was so wrinkly. It wasn't the way it seemed both pale and flushed simultaneously. It wasn't the angry, bloodshot eyes. It wasn't the patchy, balding hair. It was all of them and everything they implied. It was a troll face, a gnome face. It was a nightmare face that shouldn't and couldn't exist in waking reality. Even after it was gone, even after Claude had me in his strong arms embracing me, even after he began speaking to me soothingly, I couldn't stop screaming. After I was calm enough to explain what had happened, Claude just kept telling me it was a dream. I don't even know if anyone knew about sleep paralysis back then, but Claude was convinced it was a dream, or what he called a walking dream. I kept telling him this is not what it was, but he just held me and kissed me, then drew the curtains and suggested we at least try to sleep. He reminded me he had a gun under the bed and told me the next time I saw it, I should just tell him and he'd shoot it for me. I knew he was humoring me, but at the same time, he really did have a gun under the bed on his side, so I felt a bit safer, and I went back to sleep. Nothing happened for a few days, and then Claude was called out of town on business, and I was to spend the night there alone. It was just one night, and I had put the gnome dream out of my mind, so I was just planning on watching a little TV. It was Dick Van Dyke night, and heading to bed early so I could have breakfast ready for Claude when he got back at 6 a.m. Obviously, you're already guessing that things did not go as planned. Before Dick Van Dyke even came on, the tapping began. I heard tapping on the dining room window, but could see nothing out there. I heard tapping on the bedroom window, and when I went back there to investigate, then I heard tapping on the front windows. A chill went through me as it occurred to me that I was entirely alone, and I might be facing more than one harasser, if indeed I was being harassed. I got the gun out from under Claude's side of the bed and stared at it for a while, trying to figure out how to turn the safety off. I had never actually used or even held the thing before, and holding it now made me feel physically ill. Stomping as loudly as I could, I marched to the front door and threw it open, holding the gun like I was ready to shoot. I yelled loudly, "I don't know who you are or where you come from, but you better go back there right now because I know how to use this here gun." At first, everything was still, but then I saw a bald head pop up from behind a small fence in my garden. Then, to my right, from behind a bush, walked the one I had seen the other night. Only this time, it was wearing a hat. It looked handmade, like a handmade pilgrim hat without the buckle. It wore a rag shirt tied at the middle with what looked like yarn. Its feet were bare, and its toenails ended in long, rancid-looking claws. I saw another head in the distance, directly in front of me, and sensed peripherally that they had me completely surrounded. "What do you want from me?" I asked in as steady a voice as I could. "Are you hungry? Do you need water?" At this, they all moved forward, each of them staring at my eyes. I can't tell you how many of them there were, but it had to be more than a dozen. I felt under their trance as they swarmed over me and tied me in that yarn. They spun me around and around until it was a cocoon, and they placed me like that on the top shelf in the back closet. Then they closed the door, leaving me in there, and I heard them utterly trash my lovely little home for what seemed like hours. I woke up in my bed to utter silence. Instantly terrified, I sat up quickly, looking around. The first light of dawn was coming through the window. I realized I had to get up to make breakfast for Claude, and that I didn't know how big a wreck the rest of the house was going to be. Surprisingly, the demons centered their destruction on the kitchen. There were 2 glasses and 1 bowl broken on the floor, and a big mess everywhere, but no broken windows. The TV set and the radio were still in place. It didn't seem as though anything but food and drink had been stolen. However, there was nothing left for me to make for Claude's breakfast. His car entered our driveway as I was finishing cleaning up. After greeting each other in that way that newlyweds have, I broke the news to him about what had happened the night before. At first, he thought I was joking, but I let him inside and showed him the empty food cabinets, the empty refrigerator, and the broken things in the trash. I don't think he believed me still, but he did say he'd drive us both into town for some breakfast at a diner. Then he could walk to work, and I could use the car to go shopping for more groceries. I pointed out that it was kind of silly to buy more food if those things were only going to eat it all again, and suggested I get Pastor Schneider to come out and bless the house or something. Claude was a good Christian man, but I think he thought blessings and prayers were superstitions. And I saw him roll his eyes at my suggestion, but he said he'd go to the bank and take out some extra cash before breakfast. This way I could make an offering to the church to thank the pastor for his blessing. When Pastor Schneider did come out, he gave the blessing and then took me aside for a private chat. He told me about some local Native Americans he was converting to Christianity. He said they told him about creatures just like the ones that stole my food. He said that family left the creatures wine and food at the outskirts of their property every Sunday before church, and so far the monsters haven't raided their home since. Maybe it was the blessing that kept them away, or maybe it was the offering, and Pastor Snyder suggested it might not hurt to try both. Well, the pastor died in 1989. My beloved husband Claude passed in 1998. And here I am, all these years later in 2017. According to Rod Serling, back then, I should be flying around with a space pack on my back or having my brain transplanted into the body of a young girl. Instead, I find myself in 2017 still here on the old property, still staring out the same windows at the same garden and trees. We never did have any children, and thanks to Claude's generosity, I've always had more than I needed. It's never been a bit of trouble making the offerings of food in the forest, and I've never seen my little monster friends ever since. But I don't think they've left, because every time I go to pick up the plates, all the food and wine are gone.
If you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
Get your Bigfoot for President t-shirts, mugs, buttons. Get them now. cafepress.com/Bigfoot for President.
Come back for more scary stories.